you sit on the, the debate of, can a Silicon Valley-based seed fund, does it have any business investing anywhere other than Silicon Valley?
Hi everyone, my name is Christine Tsai. I'm a partner at 500 Startups. We are a seed fund and we also run an accelerator program both here in Mountain View and in Mexico City. In terms of international, I think are probably about 25% of our investments are international, and when you look at our when you look at our accelerator batches, it actually gets, the ratio actually gets pretty high. Like the last couple of batches, more than half of our companies have come from outside the US. Our staff is pretty global. We actually have venture partners that are focused on different regions, namely Brazil, Latin America, Mexico, China, India, and Southeast Asia. We do also invest like outside of those regions. As for whether seed funds or funds in Silicon Valley should or can scale outside, I think just from our experience, it is I can see why most investors wouldn't do it. It is a lot of work, and depending on your investment strategy, and how many partners you have on the staff, it may or may not work. So I don't think firms that don't do it, I don't think there's anything wrong. I think if you are going to do it, it's great. It's just you have to be prepared for the challenges of running an international portfolio and kind of understanding the markets, and we've seen a lot of challenges, but if anything, it's something that we still are very actively doing. So,
all right, David, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is David Lee. I'm founder and managing partner of SV Angel, and we make seed investments in consumer internet software-based investments. We probably invest in more rather than less companies as compared to other venture firms. And so in terms of the question as to whether or not it's good or US-based firms can scale into overseas or in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, I definitely agree with what Christine said in terms of, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I think it's very dependent on an investor's business model, and every investor has a different business model, and for some, it could really work. If you're taking a more hands-off approach or if you're trying to help at certain inflection points. And for some, it may not work because they value sort of being right next to the entrepreneur or near the entrepreneur where they can add quote-unquote value by working on a day-to-day basis. So it's really hard to generalize, and the most important thing is to sort of accommodate your strengths and what you do best with the geographical constraints.
So what is SV Angel's take on it?
So our take is, it's really hard to say. I think we're fairly opportunistic. So 5 years ago, about 5% of our portfolio was in New York, and 5% was in mobile. And now, probably 25% of our companies are based in New York. We go there once a quarter. And probably, like all the investors here, maybe 55 to the majority of our investments have a mobile component. So I never say never. I think the default is to remain US-based. We have some international investments. And I think that is one of the trends that at least I keep an eye on in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what about you? You're very known for being very involved with the companies that you invest in, and I know your view of angel investing is that you're not just throwing your money around. So what's your global view?
So very involved, pretty local, and if anything, so out of the 145 companies we've invested in the last 9 years, 5 were outside of the US. So not that much. And if anything, we've decided to actually stop doing anything outside of the US. And for us, US includes Canada, by the way. So it's US and Canada.
They would love to hear that.
And the reason why we have this approach is, as we heard, every firm has a different strategy, and as long as you have the means of your strategy, anything can work. In our case, we write pretty large checks. $500,000 is our minimum size now. So we're always the largest or second largest investor in the round. And the reason why we get so much exposure and large ownership in the companies is because of our involvement. The fact that we go pretty deep in terms of the company's operation. And so for us, it's 80% Valley, 10% New York, and the last 10% is between Southern California, Boulder, and Waterloo/Toronto. Why Canada? Because, well, we found just an amazing set of opportunities that really warrant us spending time in Canada to source deal flow. And, you know, we feel very good about that. Looking at what I've seen in Europe and Asia, so I'm really not able to comment on the Asian market. I haven't done anything there, but coming from Europe, I used to be French. I haven't lost the accent.
He's recovering French.
I would joke, I'm the French who hates the French, but they are so bad now that I even don't do that joke anymore. The point is, in Europe, it's so challenging for companies to get off the ground, get their seed financing, and eventually raise their Series A, Series B, because you don't have a concentration of market and VCs and everything over there. Sometimes you just decide to go and sell the company early as opposed to raising. We've basically done that recently with Blink, which was a European hotel tonight that was just acquired by Groupon. It's just really, really hard over there to see the same scale. And so we decided to retract and just focus on US companies.
You made it. You could have come in now. You even were 10 minutes earlier than you needed to be.
I'm going to have to be that much more colorful to make up for the time.
So tell us about your fund and where you guys sit in the whole global thing. I know you're more global than some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, so many interesting stories. Number one, you know, I am founder and managing partner of Felicis Ventures. beGLOBAL could actually be our motto, interestingly enough. So I think it's a very good match to be in this conference. We're going to have 6 people as of Monday, and every 6 members of our team is international from 6 different countries. It's 4 women, 2 men. So I think from our DNA, it's very international. And in fact, my humble origins at Google was actually being the first international product manager and first international salesperson. I had a great chance to go to Korea and do every single deal that we had in Korea. In fact, David and I worked on it together as a team. As a firm, we have a different take and approach to this. I think a lot of times we feel that this whole international order is reversed. I think the only thing that matters is we're only interested in what we call iconic, great founders and great companies wherever they are in the world. I think there is this attitude and approach, oh, Korea is a hot country, let's go invest in Korea. China, Brazil is a hot country, let's go do a China-Brazil fund. We have one fund. We're based out of Palo Alto, and yet we've been able to invest in companies in 7 countries. Those represent about roughly 20 to 30% of our portfolio value, so it's pretty significant. And they are not just small little companies. They include companies like Rovio in Finland, Shopify in Canada, Baby in Brazil. By the end of the year, we're going to have 10 companies, if everything goes well. One of them will be in Asia for the first time. We always had the global approach, and we think it cannot be kind of this drop thing. It cannot be packaging. Either you have it in your DNA or you don't. And so I think the strategy fits us really well, and we've been very successful with it. And we can imagine that it's going to continue to be that way. We also think that as much as there are amazing companies in Silicon Valley, and this is a great, great place to be, and we're headquartered here, talent is global. There is no monopoly of talent in Silicon Valley, and we're happy to wherever great companies are, and we're happy to fly there and create great partnerships.
Now, I think that I don't know any venture capitalists who would dispute that there's good ideas everywhere and there's good entrepreneurs everywhere. I mean, we've seen in Silicon Valley, there's 2 foreign guys on this panel. Like, we've seen in Silicon Valley, many of the iconic companies have been created by immigrants. So, I think that's something everyone knows. And yet, I think the reason a lot of particularly early stage venture firms don't invest in other countries is not because they don't think there's opportunity there. I mean, their job isn't to go around the world getting every opportunity. It's where can they make the best bets and add the most value. And I think some of the debate here with the different views and ways you guys invest has to do with what is the job of a seed fund? And for you, as an investor, what's the job of a seed fund? I mean, I know for SV Angel, you guys like to be that emergency, call the wolf from Pulp Fiction phone call. You couldn't have the David Lee, Ron Conway juice of closing that final deal in China.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so if the topic is what, the role of a seed fund, I think all of us, I think you've heard different approaches and different styles. I mean, I think it's become sort of a cliche to say it's never been easier to start a company. And I like to say it's never been easier to start a seed fund, relatively speaking. I mean, if you think about, I think last week you heard Don Valentine and Tom Perkins talk about starting Kleiner Perkins, and they tried to raise $10 million and they could only raise 8. And so now I think it's very easy to start a seed fund, but it's very hard to build one in the same way that it's very hard to build a company. And so the role of the seed fund, I think the challenge for all of us is how do you differentiate and how do you add value in a different way, because all of these companies have different needs. And so it's really hard to generalize these things because it's so fact specific.
But I'm actually asking for the exact opposite of a
Oh,
generalization.
sorry.
Like
Okay.
for you, like for each of you, and you're welcome to go first.
Yeah.
Like what is, because that to me is the difference with whether you can invest globally or not.
So
Right.
let me give you an uncanned answer. First of all, just because of our size, I think we're very similar in size. A lot of people automatically put us into the categorization of seed fund. We are not a seed fund. We call ourselves a boutique fund. I think it's very important to think out of the box. We think we have the perfect size to make meaningful investments, but we're small enough that we can work with the right founders for the right reasons. I also think this approach of being stage focused or valuation focused is all crap. I think the only thing that's relevant is finding great companies and great founders. I joke with people, like I spoke at an angel conference that was full of like maybe twice the size of this room. And I said, you know what, we were able to invest in Rovio in Finland as opposed to 100 other investors, and there wasn't a single Finnish investor in the company. We invested in Shopify, and other than one angel, none of the investors were Canadian. And it's one of the best companies in Canada. These days, our Silicon Valley portfolio companies, there are probably 35 countries represented among the founders. A lot of these companies have international operations. It's just so different that you can't just categorize or cliche these things. I think what we found is also adding value is kind of cliched as well. Just to give you an example, I mean, the only reason we made it, I think, to the Rovio Syndicate to be one of 3 investors compared to 2 other funds that were like 20 times our size is because we've been talking to them for 10 months, and then all of a sudden, right before Christmas 2010, Rovio needed an online store. They're like, we have 8 days, we don't know how to do this. We connected them to our company in Canada, which makes online stores. The CEO put his best engineer in 7 days. Rovio had his first online store, sold out the inventory in 3 days, and out of 16,000 online stores, it became the largest store for Shopify. That was a 30-minute phone call that became a huge win. This concept that investors have to spend tons of hours, they have to be on the boards of companies, I think is totally looking at wrong priorities. We feel that the reason why we can succeed as a boutique fund is because we can always do things that are meaningful and asymmetric for the founders. As long as we can get that done at the time it's needed and be relevant to the founders, we're going to have value. And in the same sense, if we have that kind of brand, then we can approach to any companies in the world, and regardless if they need money, they will want to work with us as a partner.
So that's true and that's true. So I agree with that. That's a great story of a value add that you had on that between Rovio and Shopify. But at the end of the day, when you invest at seed stage and you're the first money in, and the company has 2 or 3 founders, basis of a product, and needs to hire, market, develop, and essentially figure out what are the hurdles they need to clear for the Series A, which is the thing that we all need to see, because none of those companies will be so successful they don't need a Series A. Someone has to do the work. If it's a bunch of repeat entrepreneurs, they might do it on their own. Some founders need a lot of support, help, mentoring, feedback. Others don't. And you just have to be ready to get in and be there for them when they need it. And sometimes you have to push and sometimes you have to pull, but you just need to be wired and set up to do it. And that's our job.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who is also building a company, I find that I'm not always very good at stopping and thinking which of my investors might help me, and I should call them and say I need the equivalent of setting up an online store. We recently hired a director of sales, and I was just telling David, who's one of our investors, it was by far the hardest hire I've had to make, and a couple of our investors played a really huge role in it, but you know, one of them, you know, Eric Hippo, who built the Huffington Post, was like, I should really help you with that. And I was like, oh shit, you're right, you should. And like, it just, you're so busy running and setting this stuff up, you don't always think, who are my investors and how can I call them and how can I solve the problem? I mean, isn't there some value to being there, grabbing coffee, knowing each other, someone just kind of physically being nearby to help jog that and help push?
No, I was going to say that's certainly valuable, and I think it just, you know, it obviously depends on, you know, I think each of us have very different approaches in terms of how we work with our companies, and I mean, just from our perspective, you know, I think a lot of people ask us, you guys have maybe, you know, 10 people on your investment team, over 500 investments, that you can't possibly spend time with all of them, and that's true. That's not our model. We're not, you know, we write very small checks usually. What we hope that entrepreneurs get from us is, you know, of course, if they ask us questions, you know, we certainly try to add value as much as we can. You know, a lot of us travel all the time, and but we hope that one thing we've done is try to really build something that scales our resources, which is like our community, so our community of founders and mentors. And I think a lot of us see that, you know, companies come to us because they want access to that, and you know, it really, you know, at the stage of like where a lot of us invest, you know, seed companies or 2 or 3 founders, you know, it can be pretty lonely. So they actually get a lot of benefit out of that. I mean, that's just sort of our model. And with the accelerator companies, you know, they certainly benefit a lot from kind of having, I think we're probably just 1 degree removed from probably anyone or everybody you'd want to meet either in the Valley or globally. So I don't discount the value of, you know, kind of the physical closeness and be able to reach out to your investors for help. But I do think that there are ways to scale that as well.
There is one aspect I disagree though, and that is a lot of our international deals, there's always a local partner. So you said don't use generalization, but I think you did make a generalization in the sense that not every investor has to play the same role.
Right.
Right? Well, our role is not to be the local player. Our role, and the only extent we're going to be able to partner with great companies around the world is to the extent that we can prove we are adding value. And that's something that has to be facts-based. So I think the most important thing is, yes, you're absolutely right. Sometimes there is value in being local, grabbing coffee, and sometimes there is value in having experienced the best experience in the world or being able to work with the best companies and transcend those learnings to other companies. And that's the reason why a company out of Finland appreciates the chance to work with us, even though we're based in Palo Alto. Sometimes a company in Canada really appreciates the fact that in the middle of a cold winter, we get on a plane and go all the way to Ottawa just to spend a couple weeks, couple days with the founders just to prove that we really want to be partners to them.
David, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so to your point and for the audience, so personally, I moved to LA about a year ago, and you know, our business is here, is in New York, and I was talking to probably one of the smartest, if not the smartest entrepreneur that I know, and we were talking about it, and he said, you know, everybody thinks that location is the killer app of mobile, and he said, actually, it's the reverse. Mobile kills location, and it was a really good insight because, I mean, think of it now. I went to Korea for the first time in 15 years, and I wouldn't have, you know, I went to attend the conference, but I probably wouldn't have gone if this didn't seem, or the global opportunity didn't seem as attractive. And part of that is you can add value as, I mean, nothing beats face-to-face, but the ability to just press a button and for free talk to somebody and probably in a year seamlessly have a video conference. That's almost as good as seeing an entrepreneur if you're in San Francisco and he or she is in Palo Alto. And so I think that is something that's super critical. You know, we go to New York maybe once a quarter, but half, if not more of the time we may spend with the entrepreneurs is through technology. So I think that is something that's a game changer in terms of this audience.
And the one thing I wanted to add is that at seed, the entrepreneur doesn't have to choose between one of us, and I don't know whether we have a deal, you know, in common, but certainly there are many deals out there with 3 of us, because right. and therefore they can pick, you know, like a firm because of the presence, a firm because of the international experience. There's a joke which dates back from my early days, which is there's always room for Ron, and so there's always room for David, because they can pull things in terms of their network, which is unbelievable. Like the deal, we're closing a deal right now, and what they've done is just simply amazing, and only Ron could do this, and you'll see what it is someday when we announce it. But the point is, they could only them could do it. So it's a matter of figuring out, as the entrepreneur, who are the best guys to back you and to support you based on who you are, what you've done, your team, your potential weaknesses, and the market you're trying to address.
Yeah, and I mean, and that was the point I was going to bring up next before you jumped in. I mean, I think there is a level of like portfolio diversification on the part of the entrepreneur as much as there is on the part of the investor. But doesn't that imply a certain sophistication of the entrepreneurs? And does every entrepreneur have that level of sophistication to say, yeah, you know, I need this guy who can handhold. I want, you know, Andreessen Horowitz because they have recruiting partners. You know, I want these guys because they have a global influence. Like, doesn't that assume a lot of sophistication? Is that totally fair?
You know, to be honest with you, let me put a couple interesting perspectives here. Number one, I do think that the best companies in the world, investors way overrate themselves in terms of help they can provide. I see our role, I think we're a lot more humble. I see our role as kind of one being of a coach or sometimes as a confidant. You know, I mean, I was amazed that I went to Ottawa, and when I was talking to Shopify, they were doing amazing things that were comparable to Google, but they were in Ottawa and they just didn't know. The fact that they actually verified that just made them comfortable. Sometimes they absolutely have the right strategy. They just need a sounding board. And you know, to the topic of sophistication, I don't know if 5, 10 years ago this conference would have been this full. But just to give you an example, I don't know if anybody in the room is from Serbia, but there is a company in Serbia that is a Facebook gaming company, and it is making $100 million in EBITDA. And you know what? I don't think they have any international investors. I don't think they have Ron Conway as an investor. And it's just as successful of a company. You have companies in Korea, and especially in messaging. And we're looking at the numbers for Android and iOS, and all the growth is coming from international. So 3, 4 years ago, I remember I was just on a panel, and I said to somebody, there's going to be a mobile-first billion-dollar company created, and Instagram ended up being that through acquisition. But it became true, and now like the facts are obvious. Everybody's looking at international in a different way. Another good example is like WhatsApp. When everybody was like falling asleep because of our Rovia investment, we started seeing WhatsApp in like all the top rankings, and the only country they were #1 was US. But the crazy thing is, I remember meeting with the CEO of HTC, and the guy had WhatsApp on his phone, and my Brazilian nanny uses WhatsApp for communication. I'm sure a lot of people are using Line. The digital goods that everybody's talking about now was invented by Tencent in China and a lot of companies in Korea. These companies are ahead. That's probably why David also wanted to go to Korea, because of the broadband and the mobile technology there. A lot of interesting innovation actually happens to also originate from there and then slowly kind of transcend to the US. So I think it's just become a pretty global world out there.
And just to follow up on your point, I also think it depends on the industry. I think you know it's much easier to identify sort of the known unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld says, in certain types of industries, whereas something in consumer internet or gaming, when it's just growing, you just don't have time to think about what you need. And it's also, I don't know if it's sophistication as much as self-awareness. I think some founders are just more self-aware of what they're good at and what they may need. And it's not like they write it down or they have this matrix, but they're just a little bit more reflective. And then there are some founders who instinctively just say, okay, TechCrunch says these are great investors, so I need them. And so, again, it's not a great answer for this panel, but I do think it's very fact and industry specific.
Yeah. And I think, well, I mean, in the last couple of years, there have been a lot more tools in terms of, like you were asking about entrepreneurs being more sophisticated and knowing what they want from their investors. I think, obviously, AngelList has been big. I mean, a lot of the companies we work with, they generally kind of have, I would hate to say that entrepreneurs are not, most of them, at least most of them are pretty intelligent, but they usually have a good idea of kind of like what they need from their investors. I've yet to meet a company that has absolutely no clue. Usually they know, they really want help with this area or, by industry. But I think it actually kind of varies, entrepreneurs who are based here in the Valley versus the entrepreneurs who are outside of the US, or they don't have the same kind of network. And I think it's certainly improving just because, we're so connected and resources are just, everything is global from day one. But like when I went to Korea, a lot of the companies, the investment climate is very different. There aren't as many angels, seed investors there as there are here. So I think in terms of when you talk to entrepreneurs from different markets and you talk to them about, say, like, fundraising or something, you get very different answers. I think, companies here may be a bit savvier in terms of that regard, but they have a lot of resources around them. It's a very different community. So I think, other markets may get there. I don't know. So it's a challenge, I think, with companies outside of this area.
I'm curious to ask you guys, particularly the ones who are more active around the world, about the importance of a fund that is based in Silicon Valley and the brand importance on this. I spent 2 years traveling through emerging markets for my book, and even countries that did have good local investors, so many of the entrepreneurs felt like it was just such a brand endorsement to have a Silicon Valley-based firm invest in them, even if it was like a pretty crappy Silicon Valley-based firm. And there's a lot of people who had a better reputation outside the valley than in the valley that I saw in a lot of these countries, because I think that there's just sort of this marquee brand associated with it. And I did a story earlier this year about this weird phenomenon where there's all this LP money that's exploding throughout the emerging world as there's all of these industries being tapped in this rising middle class and all these macro trends that are sort of undeniable, and yet a lot of the opportunity is in those places. But instead of that money staying in that country and going there, increasingly that money wants to be in Silicon Valley VC firms who then go into those countries and invest. I mean, it's like the Valley is still sort of this clearinghouse or this stamp of approval for a lot of activity. I'm curious if you guys think that's overstating the case or the brand value that you've either seen or enjoyed.
I think you're observing a trend, but the way I would put it is the reason why that money is trying to come to Silicon Valley is there might be some people that have a proven track record here of placing that money smartly, and hence that money wants to come here. I don't think it's as simple as, oh, let's go to Silicon Valley and find a fund. I'd like to think that the reason why our companies want to work with us is not just because we're a Silicon Valley fund, but we were #2 in exits last year among all the venture capital firms. We have some amazing brands. And also, to Christine's point, through AngelList and LinkedIn, any smart founder can easily do a reference check on us, right? If we didn't do right by our founders, we're just not going to exist. Our reputation, to the extent that we can't enforce it, we would not be in business. So the way I think about it is, a lot of the companies that I'm seeing, sure, there is some interest of being in Silicon Valley, but they just want to work with people that really understand what they're doing. And I've just been amazed that in the 10 years, even from the Google days, the level of sophistication has increased now. The smart founder can easily do a reference check on us, right? If we didn't do right by our founders, we're just not going to exist. Our reputation, to the extent that we can't enforce it, we would not be in business. So the way I think about it is, a lot of the companies that I'm seeing, sure, there is some interest of being in Silicon Valley, but they just want to work with people that really understand what they're doing. And I've just been amazed that in the 10 years, even from the Google days, the level of sophistication has increased now. The founders, in other countries might be less connected. Their network might be smaller. They might not know everything, but they clearly know the basics. But I think the way, at least the very smart ones, are choosing to work with people that have a lot of domain experience and have proven that they can add value beyond money. And that's also a moving target. It's not like what we're doing today, but what we keep doing and thinking out of the box.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Christine? You guys spend a lot of time in other countries.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the audience. So I think when we've spoken with a lot of corporates or kind of other investors coming from outside the U.S., they actually, I don't know if they would just want to invest in any fund, but they really want to be in Silicon Valley. And I've seen that with even a lot of the Korean companies. They really want to be more global. They feel the pressure to be more global. To them, global means the U.S. and specifically kind of being in Silicon Valley. There have been, Samsung set up a big, office here in Silicon Valley, and there have been other big Korean companies that have done that as well. So, yeah, I think there is still kind of there's that brand value with Silicon Valley. Most of them are smart enough to realize like they want to work with kind of like the best in Silicon Valley, not just any random firm. So it's kind of funny when you say that there probably are some investors who might have a better reputation outside the Valley than here. But yeah, I mean, I think that's very true for a lot of the bigger companies, and then for entrepreneurs who are outside the U.S. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not everybody feels that way, I think, but a lot of them do see Silicon Valley as kind of like the Mecca, and like, you know, it's sort of like if you're an actor, you want to be in Hollywood, they kind of like, I have to be in Silicon Valley. And some of them make it, some of them don't. It's kind of like, some of them feel like it's more achievable, some of them feel like it's sort of like this dream, or, but you know, at least a lot of the companies, I'll just, you know, because this is a Korean conference, like when I was in Korea, a lot of the Korean companies, like every single one of them said, we really want to be global. For them, that meant the US, but they didn't necessarily know what that meant. They kind of, I look at their products, it still looks very Korean to me, so I think they at least have that desire. And they kind of think global Silicon Valley. It's very top of mind. So I agree that it's not just it actually is, from my experience, it's real. Like people really value that.
Mm-hmm. So David and Jeff, I'm curious, and we're getting towards the end here, but what would it take? What would have to be the circumstances for in a few years, both of your firms to be like, you know, shit, we got to be in China, or we've got to be in India, or we really have to be doing a third of our things around the world? David, maybe I'll start with you. You guys have seen a shift in New York, which is not the same thing. What would it take for you guys to become more global?
I mean, it's really hard to say, but I mean, I can't predict this, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 years, you know, a good portion of our portfolio is international related. I mean, one of the phenomenons that you see, I mean, there was a lot of discussion, oh, are we in a bubble? There people were talking about 2 years ago, and I think what people failed to, in my opinion, to remember is that the addressable market is 10 times larger than it was 10 years ago. And so, and the only reason why it's 10 times larger is because of the international opportunity. And if you don't understand the international opportunity, that's the only way, you know, an Airbnb becomes a multi-billion-dollar company, or a Dropbox, or a Pinterest, or some of the companies that that we all know. But the way that they sort of quote unquote become large is by addressing this huge opportunity. And so what it would take is if I look at New York and I think of Foursquare, you just see, you know, and I think of that one company that you look at and you say, I need to be in that company. And that's what investors will do. We can talk all we want, but if the investor is in Serbia, or if that company is in Serbia, if it's in Chicago, if it's in Silicon Valley, and it's great, investors will flee from Silicon Valley to get to that company. So I think it does take that one company that captures the imagination of an investor, and where they say, this thing can be a global phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's two things here. One is, do we need to build scalable global companies, so they start in the US and eventually they expand Europe, Asia, and so on and so forth? Absolutely, that's the only way to get to $1 billion you know, in revenues and market cap. In terms of where you start, I think it's a choice that each of us has to make independently. As David says, if we find, or if a company which is uber awesome, you know, finds us and is just too good to be true and pass on, then of course we'll do it, because that's what we're opportunistic. But in terms of having people actively seek deal flow in different parts of the world, we just decided that it was just too difficult for us, and we have those 4 geographies. And to be honest, you know, I don't know how much we're going to do in terms of LA and South sort of California, because it's kind of really hard there to scale companies and to bring additional financing. And we just find that Canada is actually really, really interesting, and we're spending resources and time on the ground to try and seek deals. So it's really sort of 2 things: is where do we try to find the deal flow versus where do we try to bring our companies? Right. Global is the only way to go.
And I would say, in whether you're doing one of those or both of those, or which one of those you're doing, it's really important for angel investors to spend time in the rest of the world. I mean, I'm always stunned by how much people say exactly what you just said, David, of, you know, look, there's 1 billion people online now, and this is why I justify this valuation, but like they've never actually been to any of the countries that are driving those eyeballs.
The funny thing is that the last time we were together, it was in Seoul.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like a reunion, plus me. All right, we have 12 seconds. We're going to ignore that, though. I have one other thing. I would love to go down the panel and ask you guys, each of you, if suddenly there was some sort of like supernatural event and each of you became, the 19 or 20-year-old version of yourself today, what country and what city would you go to make your fortune? Would it be Silicon Valley? Would it be Beijing? Would it be Seoul? Like, if you could do it all over again and be 20 years old today, resources, go out and make your fortune, what would be the most exciting place to be? You start?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. Despite the fact that we're so international and global, I'm going to say that I can't be hypocritical. I'm originally from Turkey. By the way, I had a great time in Korea because we fought with the Koreans in the Korean War. It was one of my best memories. My very first time in Korea, I feel like, I'm with cousins. I'm with people that I really know. I feel like Silicon Valley is like the Florence in Renaissance. We are the new Florence of the information age. And as much as I truly believe talent is global, opportunity is global, I really would be hard-pressed that even if I were a 20-year-old today, that there would be a place better than this to create that. I would say the odds are highest here. I've seen amazing, crazy places where founders have made things happen, but this is an incredible place to be, and I'm here. So.
Jeff?
So before doing this whole thing, I was actually a CTO, and back in '96, I had a few Silicon Valley search firms reaching out saying, hey, we're looking for a CTO, are you sort of interested in relocating? And going to Silicon Valley was actually part of my personal dreams and my wife's dreams as well, but I really liked what I was doing and I ignored those sort of calls to leave earlier. And thank God I don't remember which firms were trying to get me because I might actually regret that. So yeah, I would totally tell myself, get the fuck out of France as soon as possible.
Just bring some wine with you. Every time you're on a flight, you have like how many cases of wine with you? David?
This may surprise you, but I would pick Buenos Aires would be one.
That one guy loves that idea.
I think it's just, if you're asking me as when I was 20, yeah, that would be up there.
Did you have different priorities at 20? Is that what you're saying?
And also, no, I say it's somewhat in jest, and Singapore. Those would be my two choices. And I say that because if I were starting companies, I would want to go where the growth is. And for sure, this is the Mecca, and I've seen it, and you can't compare the velocity and the concentration of talent. But in terms of this whole theme is a multipolar world and other parts of the world growing in prominence. And for me, I mean, if you think about Singapore, for example, some of their policies, the government attitude towards technology, sort of, not having a lot of competition. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can create something great and you don't have to be around a lot of people. You can do it remotely. And so, and also Latin America. I mean, I picked Buenos Aires because, it seems funner, but, I do think those are the areas, those are the regions of growth that I think are really interesting.
Yeah, I can think of like what a more interesting answer would be, but for me personally, I was like born and raised in Silicon Valley. I think I would probably just be here. I just think, as much as there's so much growth happening in different markets, and I think it's great, and obviously we are bought into that. We are investing outside of the US. I still, we're based here for a reason. Maybe a second choice might actually be Korea. I mean, a lot of people don't think of Korea as a big market because it's a small country, but at least what I've seen in the last year, there's just been a lot of excitement and growth in the Korean startup ecosystem, and there's a lot of talent. So that might be a close second for me.
So maybe one thing I can add, I think it's a really awesome question, but I think it's missing one thing. When I look back and try to think what really made things enabled for me is being in Silicon Valley, but I also lived in places like Morocco and Switzerland, and I feel one of the sad things about a lot of Silicon Valley investors is that they won't even bother traveling. I mean, even my trip to Ottawa, I thought, Ottawa, by the way, we consider Canada as a separate country. I'm married to a Canadian. I would be killed if I said Canada is part of the US. but I do think that even if like you're from Korea, like go to other countries to the extent. I mean, I was in Buenos Aires. I had an incredible time. It didn't help too much with my tango skills, but still, I had an amazing time. I feel like those trips taught me a lot, and I feel that's one thing we're missing. Sure, like, you know, we have a home base here, but like, you can fly to anywhere. Like, why would you not want to see these places? Even my trips to Korea, I've been there 7 times, and every trip, the people that I met, the things that I saw, was really, really eye-opening, and I think it really transformed the way I think. And clearly, where one lives is important, but these days, also what one sees and how many different cultures and people they've been exposed to makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, I hugely agree. I think it doesn't just change the way you look at technology and the markets and who are these people consuming, but it changes the way you think, and it changes the kind of person you are. I mean, I think if I had had children before traveling the world, I would have been one of those like annoying pregnant women who's like, I can't move from the couch. But like, because we just treat pregnancy like a disability here. I spent so much time in Africa where like women are like 9 months pregnant and like out working and like carrying. And it's like, you realize like, no, pregnant women are actually hugely resilient. It's just an American thing. And it's like, you know, that's one example, but I think it is just like so, it changes the wiring of your brain in a different way, which if you're supposed to be looking for new opportunities is a good thing. We're now 6 minutes over, which is, I think, an acceptable rogue performance.
That's fine. I just, yeah, it's wow. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, thank you all for listening, and big thanks for the
Thank you, guys.